Hey everybody. Nice to see you all. I was trying to think of a song we're going to talk about brokenness today, a very heavy topic. I was trying to think of a song with broken in the title. And all I could come up with that is that very not heavy, very fun Elton John. Who else was it? But Grease, you know how it is. Okay, so we are going to
Kiki
be
D. It
today. Who's it?
was Kiki
Say it again.
D.
Kiki Day, good. Thank you. Bob, good to have you here. Uh,
TTD, TTD.
oh, Kiki D. Okay, you know
D-E-E.
what? I think we'll figure it out on in the chat, in the chat. Okay, so here's the we are going to be looking at the idea of brokenness today, but looking at a particular image of brokenness that that sort of comes up out of uh, the commentary on the measurements of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle. Some of you may have read this essay this week, and so you kind of know the beginning of what's coming. This essay, but I will tell you that this is a great opportunity to do what I had sort of intended to do with this class, which is to write an essay and then to be able to share the things that I just wasn't able to put into the essay. Because the truth is, I started this essay with the first text that we're going to look at today, but there's actually a whole backstory and a front story. And that is to say, and people take up this image and continue continue to reflect on it through the ages. So let's say a blessing, and then I'll kind of take us in to this this first appearance of the broken measurements of the ark. That's where we're going to start. Okay, let's say a blessing. For those of us who have not had a chance to study Torah yet today, studying Torah is a mitzvah, and we make a blessing over it. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay, so here is here's the source sheet for today, and we're going to start. The truth is, a lot of this stuff that we're going to look at today comes up first in Parshat Truma, because Parshat Truma is the parsha where we first begin to lay out the construction, the instructions for the construction of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, the traveling desert temple. But this week we repeat all of those instructions or the Torah repeats all those instructions because Moshe got them from God, and then Betzalel, the master builder, took those instructions and built the tabernacle. So this week we're looking at the building of the tabernacle, but that means that we are repeating tons of very detailed information, which in itself is a kind of a problem to be solved. Like, why does the Torah repeat all this information? But for our purposes, it actually is a good opportunity, especially in these parshot that are sort of non-narrative. It's sometimes difficult to figure out, what are you going to talk about, this measurement or this measurement? So these the repetition actually gives us a chance to talk about something that maybe we missed last time. So let's take a look at the measurements of the ark. And the measurements of the tabernacle include measurements of the whole structure, the courtyard outside, the curtains, the planks. I mean, it's I feel like many people have made the IKEA instruction manual joke because it feels like that. But there's something about the measurements of the ark itself. And when I say the ark, your ears should perk up, because that's not just anything in the tabernacle. That's the thing. That's the centerpiece. That is the Holy of Holies, right? In the Holy of Holies, that's what was there in the ark, and in the ark are the tablets, and that's as close as we get to some kind of contact with God, or at least some remnant of our contact with God at Mount Sinai. So, did I put in the chat? I don't think I did. Did I? No, I didn't. Okay, so here's the source sheet for today. And it's interesting. This is a different class, but the first thing that Moshe receives from God or describes is the Aron, but it's not the first thing that Betzalel builds. And there's all kinds of interesting Torah on the order that the Torah gives us these various parts of the Mishkan and why and what had to be built first and what's essential and what comes later. But that's, again, for a different class. In our Parsha, in Parshat Vayakhel, we come across the ark sort of midway through. So here we are in chapter 37 of our Parsha, and we've been detailing, here, let's just take a look a little bit at how it looks. Put it in English. So like you can see, like we've been detailing, the 8 planks and the 2 planks and, on and on and on and on. And then we get to chapter 37 and we get the ark. And Betzalel made the ark of acacia wood. V'yas Betzalel et ha'aron atzei shitim. And here are the measurements. Amatayim v'chetzi arko, 2.5 cubits long, v'ama v'chetzi rachbo, and 1.5 cubits wide, v'ama v'chetzi komato, and 1.5 cubits high. Now you will notice, it's just noticeable, it's striking if you're reading your Torah carefully, that all of those measurements are half measurements, or 2.5, 1.5. There are half measurements there, which is not that big a deal, except that this, it turns out, is the only object in the Torah that is entirely made up of half measurements. So that's notable. There are some other half measurements in the Mishkan, but this is the most important object in the Mishkan, has half measurements all around. And that's got to catch the eye, got to catch the attention, because you always notice the ark, and there's something different about the measurements of the ark than everything else we've seen. Not just in the Mishkan, there are other cubit things. The word for that we use in measuring lengths in the Bible is an amah, a cubit, which is like an amah is kind of like a half an arm's length or something like that, like this. So that's like an amah, and so I'll translate it as cubits, but we're talking about amot. So that's what you'll hear in Hebrew. That's the plural, amah and amot. Okay, so we've got these half measurements. That's curious. What do we make of that? And we begin with this short piece of commentary by one of my favorite commentators, the Baal HaTurim. The Baal HaTurim was Rabbi Yaakov ben Asher, who was born in Germany, but emigrated with his father, the Rosh, Rav Asher, one of the great sages of the medieval period, to Spain, and then the Tur became one of the great sages of his generation, the Baal HaTurim. We call him the Baal HaTurim because that's the master of the columns. And he wrote a book called Arba Turim, the 4 columns, in which he organized all of Jewish law into 4 categories. And that book is monumentally important, and a lot of Jewish law follows forth from the Tur. That we just call it the Tur, the column, and then we end up calling him the Baal HaTurim, the master of the columns. So he is mostly known for being a kind of master legalist, but he has this commentary on the Torah, which is so much fun, because what he demonstrates is that he has a kind of savant-like mind, and he's always finding these little connections that nobody else sees, and often it's like gematrias, like adding up the numerology of Hebrew letters, or he'll do like the first letters in every word in this verse, if you take them all together, they make this word. Like he finds things like that all the time. So it's not surprising that he would hone in on the half measurements. But he says something here that will be that will give us the image that will be the subject of our discussion today. So let's take a look at the commentary of the Baal HaTurim. And here we go. Okay, so the Baal HaTurim says 2.5 cubits long, cubit and a half wide, and a cubit and a half high. And here he starts his commentary. Kol midotav hayu shvurot b'chatzaei amot. Lelamed shekol mi shelomed Torah tzarich leshaber ulashpil atzmo. All, and this is really the phrase, all of its measurements were broken, shvurot, into half measurements. So maybe he was just sort of like speaking casually, like you break it into half, but no, the brokenness is that language is his point, because he says the halves are not just halves, they are broken halves, to teach you that anyone who learns Torah must break and lower themselves. Okay? Now, let's just first of all figure out what he is saying. You see the move he's made. He calls the half measurements broken measurements. And that is to teach you that anyone who learns Torah must break and lower themselves. Okay. So, I want to take a minute to just think about, like, what's the ethic there? Like, what does that mean? What is he trying to say? So Noah will help us get started.
Yeah, this is one of the more interesting commentaries, one that the Baal is making it so that when we study Torah, we think we're completely whole when we're doing it. And Yom Kippur, we're obviously brokenhearted and trying to reach the most high plane to stand before God. And with that, being brokenhearted, studying Torah, we are open to all that we can take in because our heart's already broken open.
Okay, beautifully put, all of that. You did something very basic and important, which is to say, the first kind of layer of interpretation here suggests humility as a virtue. That is, we have to break ourselves, to humble ourselves, to be kind of that seems like the language here, to be lowered and humble and broken in order to be open to receive Torah. And it's like Noah says on Yom Kippur, in order to receive tshuva, in order to receive God. Actually, maybe this is a big concept, that there's a certain amount of I don't know, is it self-punishment? I mean, I'm actually, that's part of what I want to talk about today, because to humble oneself, to lower oneself, that's not surprising language from our religious tradition. But to say leshaber, to break oneself, that's pretty harsh. And that also is not unheard of, but it's pretty harsh. Now, let me give you one reference point. I was not sure whether I put two, way at the end of this source sheet, you'll find two additional sources, just like brokenness texts that I always think about. And I wondered if they would come up, but Noah's first comment here reminds me of one of the kind of classic texts of brokenness, has become the classic text of brokenness, because Noah used a phrase that wasn't there in the Baal HaTurim. Noah kept saying, with the ark behind his head, by the way, I'm now realizing, Noah kept saying brokenhearted. Now that's interesting. Is it breaking our hearts or breaking ourselves? And is there a difference? Because I feel a difference, right? When I say, you're brokenhearted, I'm brokenhearted, there's something about that feels like it's hard, but it's tender, and there's something, you've really opened yourself. To be broken, though, that could be really dangerous. All right, so which one are we talking about? But there is a very famous text on brokenheartedness that is given over in the name of the Baal Shem Tov, and I'm just gonna it was like something I was like saving, see if it would come up, but it's already come up. Let's take a look at it here. This is an example of the kind of language that I think that here, additional text down at the bottom, the kind of language that I think that Noah was giving us. This is a story about the Baal Shem Tov, recorded in another book, the Or Yesharim, you can see in 1884. After the shofar blasts, the Baal Shem Tov said, so the whole story, I'm sorry, there's a little backstory here, which is there's a guy who learned all of the like different notes in the shofar and how to do them exactly, and then he had all his notes and he lost the paper where he was gonna, and then all of a sudden he's like, and he had to blow the shofar, and he was so brokenhearted that he wasn't able to do it well, and he just felt crestfallen. And the Baal Shem Tov said to him the following, or so the story goes: after the shofar blast, the Baal Shem Tov said to him, in the palace of the king, there are many rooms and compartments, and for every room, there is a different special key. But the master key of all is the axe, with which it is possible to open all the locks on all the gates. Oh, you just have an axe. You don't even need a key. So it is with a ram's horn. The secret meanings are the keys, like all the little notes you learned. But the master key that opens all the gates is the broken heart. When a person truly breaks his heart before God, he can enter into all the gates in the palace of the King above all kings, the Holy Blessed One. I mean, that's such a great, I tear up a little bit when I read that. Like, it's like, wow, the master key is the broken heart, and we can break through all the gates here. Okay, so that's one way to think about what we're talking about here, is that you have to be humble and break your heart open a little bit so that you can be vulnerable and ready to receive. That's like a beautiful language of sort of inner self-observation. Let me just, I'm gonna move into other interpretations, but before we do, I can't help myself. This is a little bit of a side story here, but there's a curiosity that I think you'll find interesting in this, in the history of this language that now I'm getting confused. There's the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidut in the 1700s, and then there's the Baal HaTurim, the commentator we first looked at in the 14th century, 1300s. And the Baal HaTurim's language, that all of the measurements of the ark were broken, that language, where did he get that? Like, where did he get that language? Because he often, like Rashi, our most famous commentator, he's often quoting earlier rabbinic sources. And in fact, like, I couldn't find any earlier rabbinic sources of this language, but take a look at a contemporary of his. This is a contemporary of the Baal HaTurim, also lived in Spain, also wrote a commentary on the Torah. Rabbeinu Bachya here lived in Zaragoza, Spain. So actually not, I think it's like a couple hundred miles from where the Baal HaTurim lived in Toledo. So the Rabbeinu Bachya says, our rabbis, Zichronam Livracha, of blessed memory, said that all of the measurements of the ark were broken. From this, we must learn that a student of Torah must be humble and their heart must break inside of them. Okay, so there's that language of brokenness, and the message here is, the first layer of understanding that Noah gave us. It's about humility, okay? And in fact, he uses the same language that Noah used, that their heart must break, right? Not just that they break themselves, but that their heart must break. But what's interesting about this is that he's quoting it in the name of our rabbis. That language here, over here in the what's it called? Acronym is Razal, Rabbeinu Zichronam Livracha, our rabbis, or Chachmenu Zichronam Livracha, our sages. That's a classic phrase that means the rabbis of the Talmud and the Midrash, the earlier rabbis, the first rabbis. So it sounds like Rabbeinu Bachya is saying, we have a tradition, the rabbis said this, and frankly, sounds like something the rabbis would say. It sounds like their kind of language. But as far as as far as we know, the Baal HaTurim is the first one to actually say this. And I don't know if somehow it passed down in, from one end of Spain to the other, or it's just in the air, or maybe there was a rabbinic tradition of the broken measurements. So that's a little bit of a side story here. Like, where do we even get this? So for those of you who are kind of nerdy like I am about like finding the original source, this one, there's some mystery behind it, but as far as we know, the Baal HaTurim is the first source. Okay, so just FYI. Okay, I see another hand up, so maybe let's hear a little more on these first two commentaries, the Baal HaTurim and Rabbeinu Bachya. The humility, the breaking of the heart. What does it mean that in order to to be a student of Torah, we have to be not just humble, but a little bit broken. Ron?
Yeah, you'll probably break me off here because I want to know if anybody brings up the idea that, of course, the measurements were something and a halves or broken because the tablets that were going to be stored inside the ark were broken, and the ark itself was paid for with half shekels.
Oh boy, that was a great comment, Ron. I am not gonna I do not resent that comment. I'm glad for it because you made suddenly a lot of great connections. Here's the other text that I was saving and not sure if I would mention. Another classic text on brokenness. Thank you to Ron for reminding us that there is another legend. Now, we don't have the rabbinic legend of the broken measurements, but maybe this is where the Torah is getting it from. We have another legend. Let's scroll to the bottom here. We looked at this, I think, in a recent class. Rav Yosef teaches in a Braita, Tani Rav Yosef, Milamed shehaluchot v'shivrei luchot. This verse that he's commenting on, take the tablets which you broke. So take them and what? Put them in the ark. This teaches that both the tablets and the broken tablets are placed in the ark. We learn from this, now he has a little lesson which may or may not be relevant to us, but from that we learn that one may not degrade a Torah scholar who has forgotten his learning due to circumstances beyond his control. Okay, in other words, the ark, which has these half measurements, Ron's right, by tradition also has broken tablet, the whole tablets and the remember Moses smashed the first tablets, those went in too, and so with the whole tablets, and this is the much more famous, I think, image of brokenness around Torah, the broken tablets. And what does that represent? That we carried the broken tablets and that they were meaningful to us. And even though they were broken, they were not discarded. And so how do we look at broken things like a person whose memory has been broken? But the shards still matter. Okay? So there's another Torah reference point. And Ron gave us a third, which is we just happen to be reading this week, Parshat Shkalim, the section from, it turns out it's from last week's Torah portion, but it's not usually read on its Torah portion. It's read as a separate selection. Parshat Shkalim details the donation of a half shekel that every fighting aged person would donate to the tabernacle, and it was a half shekel each. So there's Ron's right, there's a lot of halves going on a lot of broken measurements, so to speak, going on in the sort of the realm of Torah. And yeah, it's starting to feel like there's something here that the Torah wants to say in using the half measurement. What is the meaning of the half measurement? And the Baal HaTurim's got one answer, but we could speculate. What is the meaning of the half measurement? Let's hear a couple more, and then we'll look at some other commentators. But let's first hear from Matt Silverstein.
There we go. There's a notion of trickster gods and that they show us what the law is because they break the law. That you don't know that there's a line until you cross the line. And I think a bigger thing than that is you don't know what you feel until you feel something else. You don't know what it's like to feel whole until you're broken. You don't know what it's like really to feel happy until you have the sadness, that you need that motion. And I actually also think that one of the things about Judaism is that we don't have a trickster God. We play that role. We do that thing. We take those steps on our own. Anyway, probably not relevant. Thank you.
Yeah, that's really interesting. What's that? Do you know, Matt? I'm sure you know that book, Trickster.
Trickster makes this world. I've read it over and over.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Okay, so is it but let's pick up on the other part of Matt's comments, the idea that the brokenness is not just a lesson in humility or self-negation, but a lesson that one must experience lack in order to know wholeness. One must experience pain in order to know joy. One must experience the one half of something in order to know the other half of something. So the world is laid out, this earthly world that we are in is laid out in parts and binaries and fractions, and we have to know all of in order to create a whole, we have to understand how all those parts fit together and have to understand the experience of each side to be a little bit broken so that you understand what it means to be a little bit whole. Okay, great. I'm going to take this opportunity because there isn't exactly like, this is somewhat impressionistic. I just want to look at various interpretations. I don't have like such a method here, but I want to take this opportunity because there's something about Matt's comments that track nicely with the next thinker that I wanted to look at, who takes up this same imagery, and that is now a couple hundred years later, the IKAR, one of my favorite commentators, who's writing in Prague in the 1600s. And he has, by this point, clearly heard the image of the broken tablets, which I think starts with the Baal HaTurim, but we don't know. And here's what the IKAR says. And I think it builds on this idea of humility, but I think it is a little bit, Matt's comments remind me of it because there's something a little bit more like, Yerida letzorech aliyah, going down in order to go up, being broken in order to be whole. There's something a little bit more whole in his message ultimately. So let's take a look at what he says. The IKAR says, Kol amot aron shvurot, all the measurements of the ark were broken, same language, to show you that every person should look at themselves as lacking in complete wisdom. This is great language. Chaser min shlemut ha-chokhmah, lacking in complete wisdom, and therefore must continually measure how much is necessary to fill that lack. For every measurement, this is almost like Matt, every measurement that is lacking teaches you that something is lacking that requires filling. That is why a principle of wisdom is, and now here there's a little bit of wordplay. Wisdom, wherever can it be found? But the word in Hebrew for wherever, me'ayin, can also mean from nothing. So wisdom, from nothing can it be found? That is, from someone who considers themselves to be nothing, fundamentally lacking. But someone who sees themselves as wise misleads themselves, believing they have already reached the pinnacle of wisdom. For as our sages say in Pirkei Avot, Ezu chacham, who is wise, halomen mikol adam, one who learns from every person. That is, someone who thinks they are lacking in wisdom and must be taught more. For when it comes to the knowledge of God's existence, they say, and this is an interesting quote because I'd never heard this book before. This is also apparently a late medieval book on meditating on how to know God, to have some divine knowledge. It's called Bechinat Olam. You can look it up. I hadn't heard of it before, but he's quoting it. But it's funny because the quote from there is Tachlita Yidi'ah shenida shalon nedacha. The pinnacle of knowledge is knowing that you do not know, which is like, oh, that's like Socrates, right? Like, oh, it's funny how these things pop up in our tradition, but okay. But so anyway, first of all, there's this builds on Matt's point, but also the IKAR's got a very particular understanding of what that brokenness is all about, and it really is about the realm of wisdom. What does it mean to gain wisdom? And as Socrates says, the wisest person is the one who knows he does not know. So you got to know you don't know in order to know more. You got to know what it's like to be lacking in order to be whole. You got to know what it's like to be ignorant in order to be wise. You got to know what it's like to be in pain in order to be, now I'm extending it because he's just talking about wisdom, but could we extend it the way Matt was doing? You got to know what it's like to be sad in order to be happy, to be mad in order to be calm. Like all of the, maybe you have to understand you understand binaries so that you can actually, in some ways, end them. Yeah. Okay, Kathy? There's as usual, there are two
Got it.
Kathy.
Yeah,
Hi, Kathy.
Kathy, so the other Kathy's talking. So actually what I was, wanting to say fits right in here, because what immediately comes to mind as you're bringing up all this is kind of musar, because the word, the key word in musar is the cultivation of midot, these measurements, these midah, and so the characteristics that and the qualities that a person is cultivating in musar are these midot. And so, of course, there's, these are the measurements. And in fact, this kind of makes me understand why that word is used. It's kind of always seemed to me kind of odd in terms of character kind of development. But here, it's not just the similar word, it's also this business of halves, because I feel like in midot practice, the whole idea is that a midah is not just good or bad, that you can have too much humility or not enough humility, that there's something in between, and there's something in the kind of almost halves, you would almost say, that is really what you're looking for. But that goes for all of the, the midot, whether that's humility or loving kindness, even generosity, that these are all things that we necessarily experience in parts, not in their extremes of all there or all lacking. So
Okay. That is very beautifully and wisely put. And it again leads me so nicely into the next commentary. So let me just review some of what Kathy said. I don't need to review it all because she said it well, but just as a way of picking up on some of these key points, which others in our tradition are going to pick up on. Okay, the word for a measurement is a midah. But that is the word that we use for traits and characteristics, the measurements of your being, midah, midot. And that the truth is, in Jewish vernacular, if you talk about midot or midas, then you will first think not of measurements of the ark, but of the traits of a person. So what are sifrei midot? There are books of characteristics, and Kathy's right. They are that genre we often refer to as musar, like musar as in discipline, personal character development, and a lot of those deal with midot. Like let's look at all of the traits: the trait of humility, the trait of kindness, the trait of fear, the trait of love. These are our midot. So that language itself, that language of midot itself, is it like points us really quickly back to our inner selves. And so Kathy expounds and says, so maybe we need to think of our own, like the halves in our own being, the different parts of us, the one side and the other side, and to be able to know different parts of ourselves and to understand that no one midah or characteristic is the end game, the complete, the total, the whole. Now that comment sets us up very nicely to take a look at the last piece that I have for you here, which truly this is why I was so excited to have this class, because I was hoping to stick it into the essay that I wrote this week, but I just couldn't find a place for it, and it's so wild that it's sort of a whole different idea unto itself. But it is, I think, picks up on some of these themes that Kathy is naming, and certainly on the language of midot being inner characteristics. So there's now we're gonna jump ahead several centuries to take a look at someone called the Zera Kodesh, which means like the holy seed or the holy offspring, the Zera Kodesh, which is an early like Hasidic, or he is early in the lineage of what becomes Sans, which actually my family has a connection to. Apparently my great grandfather was a chassid of the Divrei Chaim, the Sanzer Rebbe, and this was an earlier his teacher, and his name was Naftali Tzvi Horowitz. Okay, so it's a Hasidic text, the Zera Kodesh, and I actually don't know it well. I came across it just because I put midot shvurot, like broken measurements, into Sefaria and just saw what popped up, and I noticed this one guy keeps mentioning it over and over and over. He really becomes obsessed with this image. So, and I mean, there were like 10 or 20 texts for me to choose from. He says a lot of wild stuff about it, but this is the one I chose. This is a text or a commentary that comes up in Parshat Kedoshim, that is in Leviticus, when we are given the instruction to use correct measurements in business dealings. So when you have scales, you have to use a correct measurement and not cheat people. Okay, so and one of those measurements is a measurement of volume called a hin, and all of the correct measurements are the language is tzedek, like correct tzedek. So a hin tzedek. That's just, I'm just telling you all this because that's the word he picks up on. What is it? Why do you have to have a correct measurement? And here's what he says about it. This is just wild, so buckle in. He says a correct measurement for the essential thing, IKAR ba'adam, the essential thing in a person, tikkun hamidot. And like this language is the language that Kathy was just talking about. Fixing your midot, fixing your characteristics, fixing your measurements. Tikkun hamidot b'shlemut. In order to for a person to bring their character to wholeness. So if one's nature is to be kind, sometimes one must behave the opposite of one's nature in order to confront those who transgress God's will. Okay, so sometimes if you're a real sweetie, sometimes you got to summon a little rage. That is why the ark had broken measurements. So here's that language that started in the 1300s that they're still talking about in the 1800s. That is why the ark had broken measurements, to teach you that someone who wishes to be an ark in which Torah can exist. What an incredible phrase here. Shemi sherotzeh sheyeh aron laTorah shetitkayem bo. To be an ark for the Torah to dwell within. Someone who wants that must make sure their characteristics, their midot, are broken. And what does he mean by that? He's already started to say, but here's another articulation of it. Sometimes they must act with goodness and kindness, and sometimes with rage and jealousy, such as when they must take vengeance for God's sake or be zealous for God. Sometimes one must act with pride, to be proud of walking in God's ways, and sometimes one must act with humility. And this is the craziest thing that he says. And someone who does not have all of these characteristics, eino klum, is nothing, and their service of God is lowly. Okay. Whew. Okay, I hardly know what to make of that. I mean, that language at the end, someone who doesn't have it all is nothing. If you've only got half, you don't understand anything. And your half might be the nice, sweet, humble kind. No, there's a full picture of our midot, and you will need them all in your life for different moments, including your rage, including your jealousy, the things that you think are like the icky, evil parts of you. No, don't just be in one side of yourself. Be a whole person, or else you're no person at all. Okay, so I don't know quite what to do with that, but let's see what we would do. We do with it here. Let's turn to Jen.
There's something wonderfully dialectical about that, right? Because what he's saying is you can't have wholeness without brokenness, or brokenness without wholeness. But they both depend on each other. And the sort of image that comes to mind that's been in my mind this whole time is that thought puzzle of if you try to cross a room by traveling by halves every time, you will approach the wall, but there will always be a microscopic space between you and the wall. You will approach and become close, but also always be apart. And Noah put this in the chat, and I'm right on the same path as Noah, where like the gap or break is between us and God. And the reason why we have a relationship with God is because we're constantly trying to return to one another, but never can fully do so. If we were ever to fully get to God, we would just be buried within that. We would no longer have a relationship because we would be one. But if we never ever approached God, we would always be avoiding or running away from that relationship. So truly having a relationship with God is to have wholeness and brokenness and wholeness.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. I mean, okay, great. So now that takes us to a really interesting place. I appreciate that, Jen, because yeah, I think you're right. Like intuitively, if the arc is half and we are supposed to be half and arc is broken and the Torah is broken in a way and we're broken, like there is something about all of this imagery that suggests we're going to meet God halfway, right? God is half of the picture and we are half of the picture. And like, we need to find like a way to fit into God. Like, it's very easy to speak of God as the whole and we are the incomplete and that's all there is to it. But on some level, I feel like, I didn't see this in any commentaries, but if the arc is halved, in order to teach us to be halved, well, that's great, but that still makes the arc that holds the Torah a halved thing. And that is a little bit like God has halved God's self. God has and this is not, a totally off the range thing to say, because we speak of God contracting God's self in this tradition in order to make room for humanity. We speak of God being partners with us in the work of creation. So we are half and God is half. Now, that chas v'shalom, such a thing could not possibly be. God is not half. And yet God is having something that is sacred in order to teach us that our halfness will, can meet God halfway. So there's something really powerful about that. Now the two halves that make a whole might not just be two halves of myself, although yes, there's one way of thinking about it. I'm looking to create a holistic inner life, but maybe actually I need the Torah to complete me. I need God to complete me, and maybe, and this is the craziest part, maybe God needs me for some kind of completion, right? Because after all, God is not going to keep the Torah, right? Angels don't keep the Torah. We keep the Torah. So we have like our little half of this picture is important, right? Okay. Allison.
What you're just talking about makes me think about magnets. And I wish that I remembered it more clearly, but I have these like half-formed memories of like middle school science projects where I like learned about magnets. There's something about like a half that also is like wanting to be whole. Like it seems that there's some sort of, it's not just a half, but like a half of what? And maybe there's something in there that contains within it like a certain type of a yearning, which is really interesting to me. And just to like bring Aviva Zornberg back into the conversation again, I think
Sure.
it's so
Always happy to have her on board. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think her perspective is just like so interesting that like we could really use these stories as like a lens into interpersonal relationships. And I think like these insights about like brokenness being connected to wisdom are just so deep. That like when we're really wise, we realize that we don't have a full picture. And
Yeah, I love
distract
what
ourselves enough.
I love what you said at the beginning, and I don't think we've really articulated this fully yet, so thank you for doing so. The half as a measurement is suggestive just in itself, like why are we making such a big deal about like, okay, so it's not there or there, but it's in the middle. But there's something about when you hear 50%, that means something. One half means it has a kind of, oh, So there's something equal on both sides. It's right in the middle. It's a division. There's something about that measurement that in its nature suggests all of these ideas. And I think that that's what we do with it is then interpretation. But the idea that like, I see a point right in the middle and that means something, that finding that point right in the middle is meant to say, it wasn't 3/4, you know, it was like the half. And that makes us think a little bit, what does the half mean? What does it mean to meet in the middle? What does it mean to be in the middle? What does it mean to be divided? All of these things that we're saying come up out of the very symbolic nature of that particular measurement. David Kurtz.
Well, I almost put my hand down because you kind of took what I was going to say, but I'll amplify it a little bit because my favorite characters in this Parsha is Bezalel, and so here we have we're for the first time the Israelites are now going to be asked to create, and this partnership and all these measurements. I'm not. This isn't a very well formed thought, but it's just there's something about you are in partnership with God in creating the original creator, and you know it's never going to be perfect. It's never going. There's going to be and be careful about with the art, like what you do with it. And there's kind of implicit warnings about it. Could it go into idolatry and all these kinds of things? So there's a responsibility and a craft that's being introduced here that I absolutely love. And it's certainly with that character. And I think what I just want to take it in that direction, take the Parsha kind of in that direction.
Yeah, I appreciate that because that we haven't really, we started somewhere near there to thinking about like humility, but there's something more than just humility. There's a sense that this is like you should approach the Ark and the Torah with a sense of awe and a little trembling because this is big savage stuff, jagged stuff, and you know, like you have to contract yourself, diminish yourself a little bit in order to be able to come into this realm of Torah where so much power and so many parts. And so, you know, like to just come and say, I'm me and this is who I am in all of my fullness. So accept me as I am. And this is the Torah I will take. And this is the Torah. No, it's like, you have to break yourself down a little bit. You have to be a little bit, there's something about that first language of the Torah, which is scary language, just to break yourself, that the way you're putting it is like, it's not about suffering as much as it's about an understanding that you cannot be fully whole and then expect to enter into this realm, because this realm is perilous and you will have a kind of you know, you will be formed, shaped, maybe completed by the experience, but you have to enter into it with some space for that to happen. Yeah. Leah Matsui.
For me, there's something here that goes like this. Golden calf, okay, and to make amends for that, to make amends and to offer further guidance, we're going to have the ark. And then we're going to have who was the chief henchman of the golden calf. For me, was Aaron. What's his new job? You're going to be the high priest. But watch it, buddy. We're not playing around. We're not done. We are not complete because your two sons are going to go. And still we have, it's like danger, high voltage. Still we have this. I don't think we're ever complete. We never get a handle on it. We always have to be really careful.
Yeah. Thanks for, you know, I keep saying it's a little scary, that language of breaking ourselves. And so I don't want to lean too heavy into it because I think some of us feel broken enough. So it's like, I want to be gentle, but let's take it seriously for a minute. Like maybe you have to break it like this. You have to be hard with yourself sometimes. You have to push yourself down. You have to break yourself down sometimes. This is not child's play. You know, this is not easy stuff. Torah is, and that in itself is, you know, that's a a startling thing to say about Torah. Torah has a power and can break and damage, like if you're not careful with this, as Aaron was not careful with it at the golden calf, as we can all, we talked a few weeks ago, we talked about the power of the ark. Touching the ark could like annihilate you. Why? Because it's not just a simple thing, it's a dangerous thing, and you have to be aware of that danger and to be willing a little bit to retreat from it, lest you be damaged by it. Okay. All right, we're coming to a close here, but I think that before we do, I especially if someone hasn't spoken yet, I'd love to hear just like, there were lots of lessons in here. All right, let's just review kind of what we saw. There were lots of interpretations. The Baal HaTurim himself, of these half measurements, Baal HaTurim himself emphasized the breaking of oneself, which we've been focused on for the last few comments, and lowering ourselves. And Rabbeinu Bachya picked up on that and used the language of a broken heart and humility. The Kli IKAR focused mostly on wisdom and to encourage us to remember that we do not know everything. And that is the basis of our Torah study, is that we seek to learn because we do not know. And the person who knows most is the person who knows that they do not know. Okay? That sort of Socratic statement. And then finally, we looked at the Zera Kodesh, who said that you have to have kindness, but also rage. You have to have pride, but also humility. You have to, if you want to be whole, you have to. What does brokenness mean for him? I think this is really interesting because he's using brokenness somewhat differently. Like, you have to have lots of parts. Yourself has to. You have to acknowledge that yourself is like sort of shattered into all these parts, and all of them are needed. All of them come to bear in the service of God. Okay, so I just wonder, like, do any of these particularly resonate with you, or would you take this in a different direction? If anyone hasn't had a chance to speak yet, and I think I see Kate's hand up.
Yeah, I don't know why it's not. I know this is very personal. I hope it relates, but I think everything we're saying is that when you're particularly in services or anytime the Torah is open, you're saying Hineni, and you're bringing every piece of yourself to it. And hopefully you're getting every piece back. And in the beginning, when I first became a Jew, I would cry when the ark was closed after the Torah service, and I'd have to remind myself, no, it comes back. You can have that experience again and again and again. And I'm going back decades since I converted. And for me, it's when I'm really paying attention, it's Hineni. Here I am broken. I am whole in many pieces, and I need this to get through my life. Torah is my guiding force at this point in my life anyway. It may not have been before, but the combination of Torah and you and Rabbi Brous and sermons and how life is at this moment, I don't know how I would get through it without it.
So beautifully put, Kate, but not just beautiful, but like really, it really resonates. And I think we should end there, because I'm glad that someone articulated that. We haven't yet, but that in some ways, like that's the message that is most intuitive. Like, come to the Torah broken, and hopefully you will be made whole in some way, or healed a little bit. Like, that's if God is meeting us halfway, then maybe we must have ourselves, or we must admit that we are broken or brokenhearted. But yeah, it's not just a struggle. It's not just, so that I can take Torah in and I'll just suffer through Torah. No, like, we're here to be healed, to be fixed, to be made whole. And maybe somehow the Torah will fit our broken parts, and God will fit our broken parts, and we in community, all of us broken, will come together and be klal, a whole klal Yisrael. So may we find that with each other, and maybe we find that with God and with Torah, that sense of wholeness. So maybe we learn to break ourselves a little bit, but may we, as Kate suggests, find in the end a sense of wholeness. So wishing you all a good Shabbos. Thanks so much for your learning. I'll see you next week.